The dust swirled across the endless Texas plains as the cattle train screeched to a halt. Steam hissed from the locomotive, while armed guards stepped down onto the wooden platform, their boots echoing against the weathered planks. Inside the cramped cattle cars, 37 German prisoners of war pressed their faces against the narrow slats, squinting through the blinding August sun of 1943. Among them, 3 women clutched their swollen bellies, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. They expected barbed wire and punishment. Instead, they found cattle. The camp stretched before them like a working ranch, with wooden barracks scattered between corrals and pastures. No concrete walls, no watchtowers piercing the sky. Just endless grassland rolling toward the horizon, where longhorn cattle grazed peacefully under the vast Texas sky. The prisoners stumbled from the train cars, their legs weak from the 3-day journey from the East Coast Processing Center. "Welcome to Camp Hearn," announced Captain Morrison, a weathered man whose voice carried the authority of someone who had spent more time managing livestock than soldiers. His eyes swept over the group, pausing momentarily on the 3 pregnant women who stood together, instinctively protecting each other. "You're not in Germany anymore, and you're not in a traditional prison. This is a working ranch, and if you want to eat, you'll work." The German soldiers exchanged glances, confusion replacing their initial fear. Where were the interrogation rooms, the punishment cells, the systematic degradation they had been warned about during their brief training on American captivity? Instead, cowboys on horseback circled the perimeter, their attention focused more on the cattle than on the new arrivals. Greta Hoffman, 7 months pregnant and the unofficial leader of the 3 women, stepped forward. Her English was broken but determined. "The women. We cannot work like men, the babies." Captain Morrison studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Behind him, a tall cowboy named Jake Thompson dismounted his horse, his spurs jingling as he approached. Jake had been working these Texas ranches since he was 12 years old, and he understood the rhythm of life and death, of birth and survival, better than any military manual could teach. "Ma'am," Jake said, removing his hat respectfully, "pregnant or not, everyone earns their keep here. But that doesn't mean breaking your back. There's plenty of work that needs gentle hands." The other 2 pregnant women, Maria and Elizabeth, moved closer to Greta. Maria, barely 19 and 5 months along, had been a nurse in Hamburg before the war. Elizabeth, older at 28, carried herself with the dignity of someone who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. As the male prisoners were led to their barracks, the 3 women found themselves assigned to a smaller building near the main house. It was sparse but clean, with 3 beds, a small table, and a window that looked out over the endless grassland. More importantly, it was away from the main camp, offering them privacy and protection. That first evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake Thompson appeared at their door carrying a wooden crate. Inside were fresh milk, eggs, and vegetables from the ranch garden. "Growing babies need proper food," he said simply, setting the crate on their table. "My wife, she would have wanted you to have this." Greta noticed the past tense, the brief shadow that crossed his face. "Your wife?" "Lost her and our baby 3 years back. Complications during birth." "Doctor was too far away." Jake's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he arranged the food. "Won't let that happen again. Not on my watch." The women stared at him, trying to reconcile this gentle giant with their preconceptions of American brutality. In the growing darkness, they could hear the other prisoners settling into their barracks, the sound of men trying to make sense of their new reality. But here, in this small room, something different was taking shape. Over the following weeks, the routine of ranch life began to reshape their understanding of captivity. The male prisoners worked alongside the cowboys, mending fences, herding cattle, and maintaining the vast network of irrigation that kept the ranch alive. They discovered that the Americans didn't shout orders or use whips. Instead, they taught through demonstration, their patience born from years of working with stubborn livestock and unpredictable weather. Hans Miller, a former artillery officer from Bavaria, found himself working beside a cowboy named Red Williams, whose grandfather had fought in the Civil War. As they repaired a section of fence damaged by a recent storm, Red shared stories of the land, of droughts that lasted years and floods that could wash away a lifetime of work in a single night. "This land doesn't care about your politics," Red said, stretching wire between fence posts. "It only cares if you're willing to work with it or against it. Most folks who work against it don't last long." Hans paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. "In Germany, we were told Americans were soft, that you had no discipline, no understanding of sacrifice." Red chuckled, a sound without malice. "Son, you ever tried to birth a calf in a blizzard? Or fought a grass fire with nothing but wet blankets and prayer? Soft doesn't survive out here." Meanwhile, the three women had found their own rhythm within the ranch community. Greta, with her background in textile work, had been assigned to the ranch's small sewing operation, mending clothes and making repairs to the canvas covers that protected equipment from the harsh Texas weather. Her skilled hands and attention to detail quickly earned the respect of Mrs. Patterson, the ranch foreman's wife, who supervised the domestic operations. Maria's nursing background proved invaluable when one of the cowboys was injured by a spooked horse. She cleaned and bandaged the wound with a competence that impressed even the ranch's part-time doctor, who visited only twice a month. Her gentle manner and medical knowledge began to bridge the gap between the prisoners and their captors. Elizabeth, despite her advancing pregnancy, insisted on helping in the kitchen, where she discovered that food could be a universal language. Her German recipes, adapted with available ingredients, began appearing at the communal meals, creating unexpected moments of cultural exchange. But it was during the long Texas evenings that the real transformation began. As the prisoners and cowboys gathered around the bunkhouse after dinner, sharing stories and cigarettes, the artificial barriers of nationality and ideology began to crumble. They discovered that a German farmer from the Rhine Valley and a Texas rancher from the Panhandle faced remarkably similar challenges: unpredictable weather, fluctuating markets, and the constant struggle to coax life from reluctant soil. The conversations were halting at first, limited by language barriers and mutual suspicion, but gradually, through a mixture of broken English, gestures, and shared experiences, understanding began to emerge. They talked about their families, their hopes, their fears about the war that had brought them together in this unlikely place. One evening, as Greta sat on the porch of the women's quarters, she felt the baby kick strongly against her ribs. The movement was so sudden and powerful that she gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Jake Thompson, who had been checking on the horses in the nearby corral, heard her and hurried over. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Greta looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and concern. "The baby, it moves so much now. In Germany, my mother would be here. My sister. They would know what this means." Jake knelt beside her chair, his weathered hands gentle as he gestured toward her belly. "May I?" When she nodded, he placed his palm against her stomach, feeling the strong movements within. His face broke into a genuine smile. "That's a healthy baby, Mom. Strong and active. Your mama and sister would be proud." For a moment the war seemed very far away. Here was just a woman about to become a mother, and a man who understood the miracle and terror of new life. The political ideologies that had brought them to this point seemed insignificant compared to the universal experience of bringing a child into the world. As summer turned to fall, the relationships within the camp continued to evolve. The male prisoners had proven themselves capable workers, earning the grudging respect of the cowboys, who initially viewed them with suspicion. More importantly, they had begun to understand that their captivity was unlike anything they had been prepared for. Instead of degradation, they found dignity in honest work. Instead of cruelty, they encountered a rough but fair justice that treated them as men rather than enemies. The Americans didn't try to break their spirits or force them to renounce their beliefs. Instead, they simply expected them to contribute to the community that now sustained them. The three pregnant women had become an integral part of the ranch's daily life. Their condition, rather than making them burdens, had awakened a protective instinct in the entire community. The cowboys, many of whom had left wives and children behind to work the isolated ranch, found themselves invested in the welfare of these women and their unborn children. Dr. Samuel Hayes, the part-time physician who served the ranch and surrounding area, began making more frequent visits as the women's due dates approached. A graduate of the University of Texas Medical School, He had delivered hundreds of babies across rural Texas, but never under circumstances quite like these. "The irony isn't lost on me," he confided to Captain Morrison during one of his visits. "Here I am preparing to deliver German babies on American soil, while their fathers fight our boys overseas. But when it comes down to it, birth is birth. Life is life." Captain Morrison nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. "These women didn't choose this war any more than our boys did. They're just caught up in something bigger than themselves. Least we can do is make sure they and their babies have a fighting chance." As Greta's due date approached in late October, the entire ranch seemed to hold its breath. She had become the unofficial spokesperson for the German prisoners, her broken English improving daily as she navigated the complex relationships within the camp. Her dignity and strength had earned the respect of both prisoners and captors alike. The night her labor began, a fierce norther had blown in from the Oklahoma Panhandle, bringing with it the first real cold of the season. The wind howled across the plains, rattling windows and sending tumbleweeds spinning across the ranch roads. Dr. Hayes had been delayed by a medical emergency in town, leaving the ranch without professional medical assistance. Greta's contractions began just after midnight, waking Maria and Elizabeth in the small quarters they shared. Maria, despite her own advancing pregnancy, immediately took charge, her nursing training overriding her exhaustion and fear. Elizabeth, though less medically trained, provided emotional support and practical assistance. But as the hours passed and Greta's labor intensified, it became clear that they needed more help than the three women could provide alone. The baby was in distress, and Greta was weakening with each contraction. Maria made the difficult decision to wake Captain Morrison, knowing that doing so would expose their vulnerability, but recognizing that Greta's life hung in the balance. Captain Morrison arrived within minutes, took one look at the situation, and immediately sent for Jake Thompson and Mrs. Patterson. What followed was an extraordinary collaboration between former enemies, united by the universal urgency of birth and the determination to preserve life. Jake Thompson, who had assisted with countless animal births and had been present during his wife's tragic labor, brought a calm competence to the crisis. Mrs. Patterson, a mother of 4 who had delivered 2 of her children without medical assistance, provided the feminine wisdom and intuition that the situation demanded. Together, this unlikely team worked through the night, their previous identities as captors and prisoners forgotten in the face of the immediate crisis. They boiled water, prepared clean linens, and took turns supporting Greta through the most difficult hours of her labor. As dawn broke over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Greta's son entered the world with a strong cry that seemed to announce his determination to survive despite the circumstances of his birth. The baby was healthy, robust, and unmistakably alive, his arrival marking a moment of pure joy in a world torn apart by war. Jake Thompson, who had feared he would never again witness the miracle of successful birth, found himself weeping openly as he helped clean and wrap the newborn. Mrs. Patterson, whose own children were grown and scattered, felt a maternal pride that transcended nationality and politics. Even Captain Morrison, a career military man trained to maintain emotional distance, found himself moved by the sight of new life emerging from such unlikely circumstances. The birth of Greta's son, whom she named Thomas after her father, marked a turning point in the dynamics of Camp Hearn. Word of the successful delivery spread quickly through both the prisoner and cowboy communities, creating an unexpected sense of shared accomplishment. The baby's healthy cries seemed to echo across the vast Texas landscape, a sound that spoke to something deeper than the political divisions that had brought them all together. In the days following Thomas's birth, the ranch took on an almost festive atmosphere. The German prisoners, who had been separated from their own families for months or years, found themselves drawn to the small quarters where Greta recovered with her newborn son. They would gather in the evenings, sharing stories of their own children back home, teaching Thomas German lullabies, and marveling at how this tiny life had somehow made their captivity feel less like imprisonment and more like an extended, strange family gathering. Hans Müller, the former artillery officer who had initially struggled with the concept of American softness, found himself whittling small toys for the baby during his free time. His rough hands, trained for war, discovered a different kind of precision as he carved miniature horses and cattle from scraps of wood. "In Bavaria," he told Jake Thompson one evening as they worked together in the barn, "my son would be about this age now. I wonder if he will remember his father when I return." Jake paused in his work, understanding the weight of that uncertainty. "Children remember love," he said simply. "Maybe not the words or the faces at first, but they remember the feeling of being wanted, of being protected. Your boy will know you loved him, even if you can't be there right now." The conversation reflected a broader transformation taking place throughout the camp. The artificial barriers between captor and captive were dissolving, replaced by the more fundamental human connections forged through shared work, mutual respect, and now the universal experience of new life. The Cowboys, many of whom had left their own families to work the isolated ranch, found themselves adopting a protective attitude toward all three pregnant women, but especially toward baby Thomas, who had become a symbol of hope and continuity. Dr. Hayes, who had arrived the morning after Thomas's birth to find mother and child healthy and well cared for, was amazed by what he discovered. "I've delivered babies in frontier cabins, in the back of wagons during storms, and in hospital rooms with every modern convenience," he told Captain Morrison. "But I've never seen a birth attended by such an unlikely group of midwives. That baby couldn't have received better care in the finest hospital in Dallas." The success of Thomas's delivery had an unexpected effect on the entire camp's medical protocols. Dr. Hayes began training several of the Cowboys and prisoners in basic medical assistance, recognizing that the isolation of the ranch meant that emergency situations would often require immediate local response. Maria, with her nursing background, became his unofficial assistant, her knowledge and gentle manner making her invaluable in treating everything from minor injuries to more serious medical emergencies. This medical collaboration led to other forms of cooperation that transcended the traditional prisoner-guard relationship. Elizabeth, whose own pregnancy was progressing smoothly, had proven herself invaluable in the ranch kitchen, where her German recipes had been adapted to local ingredients with remarkable success. Her sauerbraten, made with Texas beef and local vegetables, had become a favorite among the Cowboys, who had initially been skeptical of foreign food. "Food is like music," Elizabeth explained to Mrs. Patterson as they prepared dinner for the entire camp one evening. "It speaks to something deeper than words. When people share a meal, they share a part of themselves. My grandmother always said that you cannot truly hate someone whose bread you have broken." Mrs. Patterson, who had initially been wary of the German women, found herself looking forward to these cooking sessions. Elizabeth's stories of life in Germany before the war painted a picture of ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances, challenging the simplified narratives of good and evil that had dominated her understanding of the conflict. As November arrived and Maria's due date approached, the entire camp had developed a routine around supporting the pregnant women. The Cowboys took turns checking on them throughout the day, bringing fresh milk from the ranch's dairy cows and ensuring that their quarters remained warm and comfortable as the Texas weather turned cooler. The German prisoners had organized themselves into a support network, with different men taking responsibility for various tasks related to the women's care. The anticipation surrounding Maria's approaching labor was different from the anxiety that had marked Greta's delivery. This time the camp was prepared. Dr. Hayes had established a more formal protocol with backup plans and emergency procedures. Jake Thompson had assembled a complete birthing kit, drawing on his experience with livestock births but adapting the techniques for human needs. Mrs. Patterson had organized the other ranch women to ensure that clean linens, hot water, and nutritious food would be readily available. But perhaps most importantly, the psychological atmosphere had changed. Where Greta's labor had been marked by uncertainty and fear, Maria's approaching delivery was anticipated with confidence and even excitement. The successful birth of Thomas had proven that life could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances, that cooperation could overcome the artificial divisions imposed by war. Maria herself seemed to embody this new confidence. Her youth, which had initially made her seem fragile and vulnerable, had given way to a quiet strength that impressed everyone around her. Her medical knowledge, combined with her gentle manner, had made her a beloved figure throughout the camp. Cowboys who had been injured on the job sought her out for treatment, trusting her competence and appreciating her compassionate approach. "She has healing hands," observed Red Williams, whose infected cut from a barbed wire fence had been successfully treated by Maria's careful attention. "Doesn't matter what language she speaks or what country she comes from. Some people are just born to help others, and she's one of them." The night Maria went into labor in mid-November, the weather was clear and cold, with a brilliant canopy of stars stretching across the Texas sky. Unlike Greta's dramatic nighttime delivery during a storm, Maria's labor began gradually, giving everyone time to prepare and settle into their assigned roles. Dr. Hayes was present from the beginning this time, but he found himself working as part of a well-coordinated team, rather than as the sole medical authority. Jake Thompson and Mrs. Patterson had developed an intuitive understanding of the birthing process, while Greta, despite having given birth only weeks earlier, provided emotional support and practical assistance based on her recent experience. The German prisoners gathered outside the women's quarters, not intruding, but making their presence known as a source of support and solidarity. They had fashioned a small wooden cradle for the expected baby, working together in the evenings to create something beautiful and functional from scraps of lumber and cloth. The cradle represented more than just a place for a baby to sleep. It symbolized their collective investment in the future, their belief that life and hope could persist even in the midst of global conflict. Maria's labor progressed smoothly, her nursing training helping her understand and cooperate with the natural process of birth. She remained calm and focused throughout, even during the most intense contractions, her quiet strength inspiring confidence in everyone around her. When her daughter finally arrived, just as the sun was rising over the eastern horizon, the baby's first cries were greeted with tears of joy and relief from the assembled group. The little girl, whom Maria named Anna after her own mother, was healthy and beautiful, with dark hair and bright, alert eyes that seemed to take in her surroundings with curiosity rather than fear. Dr. Hayes pronounced her perfect in every way, while Jake Thompson marveled at how such a tiny person could carry such obvious strength and determination. "She's got the look of a survivor," he observed, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one weathered finger. "This little one's going to make her mark on the world, you can see it already." The successful delivery of Anna further cemented the bonds that had been forming throughout the camp. The Cowboys, who had initially seen the prisoners as a burden and potential security risk, now viewed them as extended family members. The German prisoners, who had expected harsh treatment and degrading conditions, found themselves part of a community that valued their contributions and celebrated their joys. But it was the relationship between the pregnant women and their American protectors that had undergone the most profound transformation. What had begun as a practical arrangement for managing vulnerable prisoners had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship and mutual respect. The women had proven themselves to be intelligent, capable, and resilient, while the Americans had demonstrated a capacity for compassion and humanity that transcended national boundaries. As winter settled over the Texas plains, Elizabeth's pregnancy entered its final stages. Her due date was expected in late December, and the entire camp was already making preparations for what they hoped would be the third successful delivery. But Elizabeth's situation was complicated by the fact that she was older than the other two women and had experienced difficulties during a previous pregnancy in Germany. Dr. Hayes monitored her condition carefully, noting signs of potential complications that concerned him. Her blood pressure was elevated, and she showed symptoms of what he suspected might be preeclampsia, a dangerous condition that could threaten both mother and baby. The nearest hospital with the facilities to handle such complications was more than 100 miles away, and winter weather could make that journey impossible. "We need to be prepared for anything, Doctor," Hayes confided to Captain Morrison and Jake Thompson during a private meeting in early December. "Elizabeth is at higher risk than the other two women were. If complications develop, we may need to make some difficult decisions very quickly." The news cast a shadow over the camp's previously optimistic mood. Elizabeth herself seemed to sense the increased concern, though the medical team tried to maintain an encouraging demeanor around her. She began spending more time with Thomas and Anna, as if drawing strength from their healthy presence, and she worked with increased urgency to complete the small gifts she was making for the other prisoners and cowboys. "I want to finish these," she told Greta one evening as she worked on a set of embroidered handkerchiefs for the men who had shown them such kindness. "If something happens to me, I want them to have something to remember that we were grateful, that we understood what they did for us." Greta tried to reassure her friend, but Elizabeth's concerns were not entirely unfounded. The isolation of the ranch, which had provided them with unexpected freedom and dignity, also meant that sophisticated medical intervention would be difficult or impossible to obtain quickly. They were dependent on their own resources and the skills of the people around them. As Christmas approached, the camp took on a festive atmosphere despite the underlying anxiety about Elizabeth's condition. The German prisoners and American cowboys had collaborated to create decorations from natural materials found on the ranch, and Mrs. Patterson had organized a special Christmas dinner that would incorporate traditions from both cultures. The celebration was particularly meaningful for the new mothers, who were experiencing their first Christmas with their babies. Thomas, now 2 months old, had grown into a robust, alert infant who seemed to thrive on the attention lavished on him by the entire camp community. Anna, though only a month old, was already showing signs of the strong personality that Dr. Hayes had predicted. But it was during the Christmas Eve service, held in the ranch's main hall with participation from both Germans and Americans, that the true transformation of Camp Hearn became most apparent. The service was conducted in both English and German, with hymns sung in harmony by voices that had once been separated by an ocean and a war. As the mixed congregation sang "Silent Night" in both languages, with the melody weaving together the different words into a unified expression of hope and peace, many of those present found themselves moved to tears. The song, originally written in German but beloved around the world, seemed to embody the possibility of understanding and cooperation that had emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. Elizabeth, despite her discomfort and the medical team's concerns, insisted on participating fully in the Christmas celebration. She had prepared small gifts for everyone in the camp, handmade items that reflected both her German heritage and her appreciation for American hospitality. For Jake Thompson, she had embroidered a handkerchief with a design that incorporated both Texas blue bonnets and German edelweiss. For Dr. Hayes, she had created a small medical kit organizer that would help him keep his instruments clean and accessible during his ranch visits. "These people have given us more than shelter and food," she explained to the other German prisoners during the gift exchange. "They have given us dignity and hope. They have shown us that enemies can become friends, that differences can become strengths. Whatever happens to me, I want them to know that their kindness has not been wasted." Her words proved prophetic. 3 days after Christmas, Elizabeth went into labor prematurely, and the complications that Dr. Hayes had feared began to manifest immediately. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously, and she began showing signs of severe preeclampsia that threatened both her life and that of her unborn child. The medical crisis brought together every resource available at the ranch. Dr. Hayes took charge of the medical aspects of the emergency, while Jake Thompson and Mrs. Patterson provided practical support. Maria, despite having given birth only weeks earlier, assisted with her nursing skills, and Greta provided emotional support for her terrified friend. But it was the broader camp community that provided the foundation of support that made survival possible. The cowboys maintained a constant supply of hot water and clean linens. The German prisoners organized prayer vigils and took over all of Elizabeth's usual responsibilities. Captain Morrison coordinated communications with outside medical facilities, though the winter weather made evacuation impossible. For 36 hours, Elizabeth fought for her life and that of her baby. The labor was complicated and dangerous, requiring all of Dr. Hayes's skill and experience. Several times it seemed that they might lose both mother and child, but the combined efforts of the medical team and the unwavering support of the camp community somehow pulled them through. When Elizabeth's son finally arrived, weak but alive, the entire camp erupted in celebration. The baby, whom Elizabeth named Friedrich after her father, was small and fragile, but Dr. Hayes pronounced him viable and likely to thrive with proper care. Elizabeth herself had survived the ordeal, though she would require weeks of careful recovery. The successful delivery of Friedrich under such difficult circumstances seemed to validate everything that the camp community had built together. They had faced a life-threatening crisis and had overcome it through cooperation, skill, and determination. The artificial boundaries of nationality and ideology had proven irrelevant in the face of the fundamental human commitment to preserving life. As 1944 began, Camp Hearn had been transformed into something unprecedented in the annals of prisoner-of-war camps. It had become a genuine community, where former enemies had learned to work together, to care for each other, and to celebrate the universal experiences of birth, growth, and hope. The 3 German babies, born on American soil to mothers who had expected only hardship and degradation, had become symbols of the possibility of reconciliation and understanding. Thomas, Anna, and Friedrich were American citizens by birth, but they were also living bridges between 2 cultures that had been taught to hate each other. The cowboys and prisoners who had delivered these babies, who had cared for their mothers, and who had celebrated their arrivals, had discovered that the bonds forged through shared experience and mutual respect were stronger than the political divisions that had brought them together. They had learned that enemies could become friends, that differences could become sources of strength, and that hope could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. As winter gave way to spring, and as news of the war's progress filtered into their isolated community, the residents of Camp Hearn knew that their time together was limited. Eventually, the war would end, and the German prisoners would return to their homeland. The American cowboys would continue their work on the Texas plains. The 3 mothers would face the challenge of raising their American-born children in a Germany struggling to rebuild itself. But they also knew that what they had built together would endure. The friendships forged in the Texas heat, the trust built through shared labor, and the love expressed through the care of newborn children had created bonds that would transcend the end of the war and the separation of continents. Years later, when historians would study the prisoner-of-war camps of World War II, Camp Hearn would stand out as an extraordinary example of what was possible when human dignity was respected and when people were allowed to see past their differences to their common humanity. The story of the 3 German babies born in Texas, delivered by American cowboys who chose compassion over cruelty, would become a testament to the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary moments of grace in the midst of global conflict. The babies themselves would grow up to become bridges between cultures, carrying within them the story of their unlikely births and the community that had welcomed them into the world. They would remember, in ways both conscious and unconscious, that they had been born into a place where former enemies had chosen to become friends, where differences had been celebrated rather than feared, and where hope had triumphed over hatred. And in the vast expanse of the Texas plains, where the wind still carries stories across the endless grassland, the memory of Camp Hearn would endure as proof that even in the darkest times, human kindness could create light, and that the simple act of helping to bring new life into the world could transform enemies into family. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.